It's Monday morning, July 6, 2026. Thanks for stopping by. So we'd go over Jim CORAM's article and be blessed by it. Hang on a second while I adjust the buttons. All right, this is called Eonian Fire and Judging, subtitle Death and Judgment, Concordant Studies. Many believe that at death, man enters into either the bliss of heaven or the pains of the netherworld, awaiting after judgment day either eternal joy in heaven or everlasting misery in hell. Then he will possess a body once again, so that, according to his particular destiny, either his happiness might be enhanced or his misery exacerbated. In the former case, a body will greatly increase his pleasures. In the latter case, it will unspeakably multiply his miseries. Okay, do you have that? This is just a general summation of the problem before us, because many believe that at death, a man enters into either the bliss of heaven or the pains of the netherworld, awaiting after judgment day either eternal joy in heaven or everlasting misery in hell. That he will possess a body once again, so that, or then, after he spends a misery in hell, then he will possess a body once again. It's kind of like puzzling, right? Once you know that the scriptures tell us that the resurrection is the thing, how is it they come up with this idea that they'll possess a body once again after they go to heaven or hell? They're going to get a body once again. In fact, let me underline that part. It's kind of vague, and if you talk to people. Okay, then he will possess the body once again, so that according to his peculiar destiny, either his happiness might be enhanced or his misery exacerbated. In the former case, a body will greatly increase his pleasures. In the latter case, it will unspeakably multiply his misery. Perhaps some would be embarrassed by the following citation from a sermon by the famous 19th century preacher Charles Spurgeon. Go ahead and highlight Spurgeon, since he's a hero to some. Yet if so, there are many others who would surely commend this writing. His writing. No? His. It is. Let's start over. Perhaps, and let's give it indents because that seems better to me. Perhaps some would be embarrassed by the following citations from a sermon by the famous 19th century preacher Charles Spurgeon. Yet, if so, there are many others who would surely commend this writing. Actually, this latter class is more consistent, if any, not to mention most, are to spend eternity in some sort of horrible physical, mental suffering. Such vivid and earthly descriptions as the following ought not to be criticized, but emulated. Okay. Now we're on to what Charles Spurgeon has to say. Let's see how far it goes. Let me check this. Oh, I know what I want to do. I want to put it in a slightly highlighted situation. Okay, that'll do. So this is what Spurgeon has to say. And he lived in the 19th century, so that would be the 1800s. When thou diest, thy soul will be tormented alone. Oh, brother. When thou diest, thy soul will be tormented alone. That will be a hell for it. But at the day of judgment, thy body will join thy soul, and then thou wilt have twin hells. Body and soul shall be together, each brimful of pain. Thy soul sweating in its inmost pore drops of blood, and thy body from head to foot suffused with agony, conscious judgment, memory all tortured, thine heart beating high with fever, thy pulse rattling at an enormous rate in agony, thy limbs cracking like the martyrs in the fire, and yet unburned, thyself put in a vessel of hot oil, pained, yet coming out undestroyed, all thy veins becoming a road for the hot feet of pain to travel on, every nerve on a string on which the devil shall never play his diabolical tune, shall ever play his diabolical tune. Fictions, sir, again I say, there are no fictions. They are no fictions, but solid, stern truths. If God be true and this Bible be true, what I have said is the truth, and you will find it out one day to be so. Okay. Thank you, Charles Spurgeon. And now back to Jim. All who wish to uphold traditional orthodoxy must affirm a belief in conscious everlasting punishment. It is insisted that the unsaved will abide forever in unspeakable misery and abject pain. Perhaps no passage of Scripture has been appealed to more confidently in support of the doctrine of everlasting misery than Matthew 25:46. And these shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into life eternal. AB, which means authorized version. Oh, here's the AB. No, this is not the AB. This is a mistake, I think. The semicolon. AB. How do I want to handle that? Okay, let's put a close parenthesis so we'll know it's tied to this one, and an M dash. And then the concordant version says, and these shall be coming away into chastening Eonian, yet the just into life Eonian. And we'll close up that. Yeah, that's better. Slightly. Okay, let's go back and make sure we're following along. Perhaps no passage of Scripture has been appealed to more confidently in support of the doctrine of everlasting misery than Matthew 25:46. and these shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into life eternal. AB, Authorized Version, King James Version. And these shall be coming away into chastening, Eonian, yet the just into life, Eonian, Concordant Version. This passage, however, is not concerned with humanity as a whole, or even with individual persons as such. Instead, it has in view, in the day of the Lord, the granting of rewards or chastenings to the nations of the earth according to their treatment of Israel. It is not a revelation concerning divine grace, nor of the evangel of our salvation. It is transcendent, and its transcendent grace. It is not a revelation concerning divine grace, nor of the evangel of our salvation and its transcendent grace. Perhaps the best proof that men do not really believe that our salvation is a matter of gratuitous grace is the fact that Matthew 25:31-46 is commonly perceived as a summary of the gospel for today. Dude, reminds you of that jackass Keith Green and his fear-mongering song about the sheep and the goats. At the end of his song, he says, the only difference between the sheep and the goats is what they did and did not do. Okay, a figure of strict chastening. We often hear it said, God didn't prepare hell for man, but only for the devil and his angels. Now, this is said in an attempt to commend God's character to us. That's funny. That is, while he did not originally create an eternal hell for us, he did prepare such a place for others. It is difficult to see how this explanation can hope to elicit our admiration and afford us any real relief. After all, these same stalwarts of eternal hellfire also insist that all but a few of us will nonetheless, according to God's subsequent appointing, still spend eternity in hell, even if it was not originally designed with us in mind. This common assertion, oh heck, what did I do? There we go. This common assertion concerning the original design of so-called hell, instead of commending the character of God to us, to the contrary, might be compared to a man, say a neighbor, who, while not preparing a certain torture for my child, but only for another, later on decides to include my child as well. Of course, the claim will also be made that hell was only prepared for man subsequent to Adam's first sin. The claim is that it was only after the entrance of human sin into the world that God decided that hell should become the eternal home for all creatures, all lost creatures of our species, right? But this is only to say that for each class of creatures, while prior to their first sin, it was never determined to send any of them to hell. Nonetheless, once they fell into sin, the decision to eternally punish them was swift and final. For all the devils, it is already too late, as it is for billions of men of the past generations. And the only way any today can escape is by fulfilling certain requirements in order to qualify themselves for exemption. It is misleading for the believer in eternal punishment to suggest, as many do, that there is any advantage here for mankind. Let's read that again. Therefore, it is misleading for the believer in eternal punishment to suggest, as many do, that there is any advantage here for mankind, or that we are thus given an intimation of special mercy for ourselves, albeit a mercy that in any case is now completely inapplicable. The fire Eonian spoken of in Matthew 25 is a figure of the chastening of the unjust nations during the coming eon, even as it is written in the prophets. On the other hand, the lake of fire in Revelation 20, which is the second death, must be a literal fire, for it is the means which brings the second death to the rest of mankind following the day of judging after the 1,000 years. Nations cannot be chastened in literal fire. In Matthew 25, the chastening of the nations in quote unquote fire should alert us to an obvious figurative usage. Indeed. Whoa, baby. Indeed. Even individual persons could never be put into a literal fire for even a few seconds without destroying their bodies, thus making chastening impossible, since death would ensue nearly immediately, right? A good example of literal fire and death is given to us in the unveiling, in the destruction of the great city of Babylon. Let's see if this is a new paragraph. Nope. It is only during the fall of Babylon that the worshippers of the wild beast and its image will be subject to torment in fire and sulfur. These alone are concerned in this judgment, though this may involve many individuals. Together, they comprise only a tiny percentage of all humanity. In the hour when judgment comes upon the city, a great conflagration will ensue. Once ignited, the fire of the city will continue to burn until it is burned up. Revelation 18:8, when nothing but ashes remain. We know that the subterranean coal beds may smolder for centuries. That is, they burn with little smoke and no flame. But this should not be said of the ashes of the city. Hence, no literal fumes are in view here, where we read that the fumes of their torment are ascending. Revelation 14:11. Fumes is a figure of speech, as is drinking of the wine of the fury of God, and blended undiluted in the cup of his indignation. Revelation 14:10. Like literal fumes, which are the product of fire, the destruction of Babylon, which is the product of God's judgment upon its inhabitants, will constitute the figurative fumes, that is, the associated evidence which will be ascending for the eons of the eons. This ascending, since it is the ascending of figurative fumes, is figurative itself as well. Like smoke, which testifies to its existence when it ascends high into the air, the destruction and death which occurred at Babylon will be exceedingly widely known and attested throughout the entire world, even for the eons of the eons. The fumes ascending for the eons of the eons, Revelation 14:11, is a figure of speech similar to the one used in Jude 7, a specimen of the justice of fire Eonian. When sulfur and fire reigned from the heavens on Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them, the inhabitants were killed, and the fumes ascended from the land. Genesis 19:28. This event is well remembered. The Israelitish worshippers of the wild beast are the supreme sinners of mankind. They have no rest day and night while they are worshiping the wild beast and its image, and shall be tormented until they die. Revelation 14, 9 through 12, 16, 2, 8, and 9, and 18, verse 8. Some of them by the blade, 19:21. Their fate will be remembered through the eons of the eons. The phrase the eons of the eons should not be viewed as if it were a proper noun, indeed, one which had exclusive reference to the oncoming eons. Compare Ephesians 2:7. Though we find that this is ordinarily the passage, though we find this is ordinarily the usage of this phrase, for example, Revelation 11:15, it does not follow that this must always be its usage, or that this is its usage here in Revelation 14:11. Or in its companion passage, Revelation 19:3. Since the judgment of Babylon is concerned with this present earth, which will no longer exist during the final eon, the plural words eons here must refer to a period which includes the remainder of the present eon and at least a portion, if not the entirety, of the coming eon, the millennium. In order for something to become present for, that is, into, for the eon, it need not have been present throughout all of the preceding portion, nor is it necessary for it to continue on until its consummation. Instead, it need only continue on into its future, since then in Revelation 14:11, eons is plural, and since the present eon at this juncture will be nearing its consummation, the reference must be to the present eon or its brief remainder, as well as the coming eon. Another important consideration is that of the other words. Another important consideration is that of the words, their torment. As they appear here, they constitute the metonymy or figure of association. Metonymy is a fancy word for the figure of association. This figure may also be classed as a figure of omission. 2 in 1. Such figures may always be made literal by the insertion of an explanatory phrase. The words their torment point us to the ellipsis or the figure of omission. Their torment, the words their torment, point us to the ellipsis or figure of omission. The full thought is the fumes of their torment, which existed in the hour of their judgment prior to their death, are ascending for the eons of the eons. Well, isn't that detailed? Even if the fumes were literal, it would hardly follow that since these fumes, which continue to ascend, that the torment which is rightly associated with them must itself continue to exist. As figures arise from the fervor of speech, this is inclined to be the terse, and this is inclined to be terse. They are often accompanied by the omission or the ellipsis of words. Figures of association may be made literal by adding an explanatory phrase like the cup containing the wine, a blessing in 1 Corinthians 10:16. The omitted yet obvious thought, which is associated with that which has been expressed, constitutes the ellipsis. In Revelation 14:8, the fumes are the reminder of the fire which tormented these idolaters during the hour, not the eon, of their judgment. The fire, however, soon consumes human bodies, even if the fire itself should continue to burn for a long span of time. The entire account is one of the desolation. The entire account is one of the desolation. Revelation 18, verses 17 and 19. The entire account is one of the desolation of the most notable city of Babylonia. It in the conclusion of this eon, Revelation 14, 8 through 11. Even as Sodom and Gomorrah and the cities about them are lying before us, a specimen experiencing the justice of fire Eonian. Jude 7. Thus also Babylon will constitute such a specimen as well. In one day shall her calamities be arriving, death and mourning and famine. She shall be burnt up with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judges her. Revelation 18, verse 8. In 1 hour, quote unquote, 1 hour, the great city will be desolated, and this will mean death to her inhabitants. Revelation 18:8, and compare 18:9 through 24. Okay, the day of judgment and the second death. All right. Let us consider the just judgment of God following the 1,000 years as it occurs before the great white throne. This is the resurrection of the unjust for judgment in that day. The primary thing to note is that the unbelievers judging will be in the day of God, in the day of God's just judgment. Romans 2:5. That sounds important. Let me think about this. Read it again. The primary thing to note is that the unbelievers judging will be in the day of God's just judgment, not in the lake of fire. As is suited to each case, the doers of evil will receive fury, indignation, affliction, and distress in that day. Romans 2, 8 and 9. The duration of which is not revealed. The primary thing to note is that the unbelievers' judging will be in the day of God's just judgment, not in the lake of fire. Okay. This will be more tolerable for some than for others. Matthew 10:15. The day of judging before the great white throne, while it will be a day of chastening, 2 Peter 2:9, even as the judgment of the coming eon, spoken of in Matthew 25:31 through 46, will not be a day of torturing. Will not be a day of torturing. Sweet. Let's back it up and pick up the whole sentence. The day of judging before the great white throne, while it too will be a day of chastening, even as the judgment of the coming eon spoken of in Matthew 25 will not be a day of torture. Okay, cool. God disciplines those of whom he is fond. Hebrews 12:7-11, and Revelation 3:19. And he is fond of humanity, Titus 3:4. We can be sure that God will be doing all things well. Exercising judgment founded upon his love. All right, count me in. Men will enter the second death not as punishment for their sins, but as a fitting consummation for the old humanity, which is corrupt in accord with its seductive desires. Compare Ephesians 4:22. God's appointed time for the vivification of all is not until a much later time, namely the consummation of the last eon. It is simply not according to his wise counsels to favor the majority of men with life during the eon of the eons. Indeed, it is only because of God's having chosen us for life Eonian that our lot is not with the rest of mankind in the lake of fire, which is the second death. The condemnation of sin has been accomplished. The condemnation of sin has been accomplished already through the work of Christ. Man, I have not talked about this ever because, I'm speak of the work of Christ on the cross as giving life. But it's also true that sin was condemned by Christ's work on the cross. He gives life. There's so much that happened on the cross. I need to learn more. The condemnation of sin has been accomplished already through the work of Christ. All personal judgment for the unbeliever's action is confined to the day of judging. Therefore, it is unwarranted to conceive of the second death as anything more fitting, as anything more than a fitting end of the old humanity and expediency, a suitable means of bringing the unbeliever's day of judging to a close. The second death evidently will occur mercifully, for it certainly will occur swiftly. This is made evident by the fact that those who died the second death will enter it by being cast into the agency which produces it. Compare Revelation 20, 14 and 15. Surely life could not continue for more than just an instant in the midst of such a tremendous blaze. Beyond such considerations as these, we must leave the matter with God, who, we can be certain, will do exactly the right thing and the best thing for the sake of all concerned. The vivification of all mankind is his purpose and happy expectation. All judgment and death will be severe for this glorious goal. The metaphor of fire Eonian. Now, in contrast to these great events from the book of Revelation, let us return to the fire Eonian of Matthew 25:41. The fire which ensues at the beginning of the 1,000 years. It is a figure of the kid nation's painful Eonian chastening during the coming eon. According to the writings of the prophets, the fire is like that mentioned by the prophets, which overtakes those nations who oppose Israel. Here in Matthew 25, the fiery judgment is extended to Eonian proportions in order to preserve Israel during the era of the kingdom within the terms of the account. It seems certain that the ones in view for whom this fire is said to be made ready are the adversary, small a, not capital A adversary, i.e., any adversarial nation or group of nations associated and its associated messengers. The political advocates or exponents, the envoys, accredited representatives, or other protagonists who had spoken against Israel. These will therefore be chastened accordingly in the day of the Lord. Angelios, or messenger, is sometimes used of mortal men, for example, John the Baptist in Matthew 11, verse 10. The word speaks of one's office, not of one's nature. Though it is often used of celestial couriers, this is not its meaning. It simply refers to one who carries or propounds a message regardless of his own nature or the character of his message. Similarly, adversary, not a capital A, just small a. Similarly, adversary is not a proper noun. It by no means is always used in reference to the great spirit being, Satan. Compare 1 Timothy 3:11, 2 Timothy 3:3, and Titus 2:3. During the 1,000 years, he is confined to the submerged chaos. During the 1,000 years, he is confined to the submerged chaos. Revelation 20, verse 3. Abusos, simultaneous, submerged. The abyss beneath the water level. Keyword concordance, page 291. It is therefore impossible to identify Satan as the adversary, which is in view in Matthew 25:41, or to otherwise include him in this judgment of the nations. Diablos, adversary, is used here in Matthew 25:41. Is a noun, dative, masculine, singular, towel, his, literally is of him or of it, of same, the relative pronoun, genitive, masculine, third person singular. The fact that these two words are both masculine in gender merely signifies the grammatical agreement. It has no bearing on translation, much less on interpretation. This setting in Matthew calls to mind the language of the Hebrew prophets. Israel in Egypt is figured as a burning thorn bush. Exodus 3:2, compared with verse 7. They were in an iron furnace or crucible. See Deuteronomy 4:20, 1 Kings 8:51, and Jeremiah 11:4. Isaiah in chapter 48, verse 10 explains it as a crucible of humiliation. When used figuratively, a crucible is a severe trial. When used figuratively, a crucible is a severe trial. Jerusalem had been melted in the crucible of affliction. Yahweh blew upon her in the fire of his indignation. Ezekiel 22, 18 to 22. Compare Malachi chapter 3, verse 2, and Obadiah 18. The judgments of the nations during the day of Yahweh in the coming eon are spoken of in the prophets under the figure of fire. God will send a fire on Magog and the isles, Ezekiel 38:22 and 39:6. He will set a fire in Egypt in the day of Yahweh, Ezekiel 30, verses 8 and 16, compared to Zechariah 14, 17, 18. He will blow against the Edomites with the fire of his indignation. See Ezekiel 21:31. If all the nations hostile to Israel were actually consumed by a raging conflagration, what need would there be for the iron club with which he will be shepherding the nations in that day? Man, that is a really great question. Let's bold it out. If all the nations hostile to Israel were consumed by raging fire, why bother with an iron club to rule the nations? Okay. They will be afflicted and forced to obey, as Israel in Egypt. This will be their corrective chastening. Matthew 25:46. Fire is often used figuratively and of temporary judgments. Even the saints will be saved, thus as through fire. See 1 Corinthians 3:15 compared with 1 Peter 1, verse 7 and 4, verse 12. Even setting aside the vital considerations of time element and administrational distinctions which concern these various topics, in itself, the popular notion that this passage, Matthew 25, somehow speaks of ourselves and the gospel of our salvation by grace is a clear index of the depth of the prevailing darkness concerning God's true grace. For we enter life Eonian at a far higher level and in a much more glorious way than these sheep nations, solely as the objects of God's grace, apart from any consideration of our works. yet they do so as a reward for their works. Get it? So what's going on with the sheep and the goats is entirely different than our experience of coming into this wonderful relationship with God by grace. They are rewarded for their works. The sheep and the goats is different. Okay? Yet even so, for these very nations, this allotment was made ready for them from the disruption of the world, Matthew 25:34. Since it was essential, nonetheless, for them to qualify for this allotment, it is evident that they only acted as Israel's benefactors because Yahweh Elohim directed their steps to do so. There's no free will here. There's no risk involved, no human independence. God alone will be glorified in that day. Though it is an impossible equation, some have confounded this judgment with that of the great white throne. Yep, some have. Let us note some of the differences. This severing of the nations occurs at the unveiling of Jesus Christ at the beginning of the millennium. Compare Matthew 24, 29, 30, and chapter 25, verse 31. The great white throne is after the millennium. Revelation 20, verses 7 and 11. It is on the earth in the valley of Jehoshaphat, this sheep and the goats thing. It is on the earth in the valley of Jehoshaphat. Compare Joel to 2 verse 3. It is not at a time when heaven and earth flee, and no place is found for those who stand before the great white throne. Revelation 20, 11 and 12. It concerns only the living nations of that day, yet those who stand before the throne are the rest of the dead following the millennium. Okay, so let's, I thought this is kind of cool to learn. The sheep and the goats happens at the beginning of the 1,000-year reign. The great white throne happens at the end of the 1,000-year reign. The sheep and the goats, there's no resurrection. It is the living nations at the time of Christ's returns, and it takes place in the valley of Jehoshaphat, apparently. Whereas the great white throne takes place when heaven and earth flee and no place is found for those who stand before the great white throne. Cool. Okay, so the living nations of that day, yet those who stand before the throne are the rest of the dead following the millennium. Okay, it concerns living nations, not dead individuals roused for judgment. That seems like it's worth noting. It concerns living nations, not dead individuals roused for judgment. Its basis is the respective nations' characteristic treatment of the Jews corporately. Not every detail of each sinner's life who has ever lived, considered individually. Its consequence is the dividing of the nations of the earth into those blessed and cursed with respect to the millennium, not to the condemnation of the unbeliever at the second death, which occurs at a much later time. If you're enjoying the reading, type 1 in the side chat. Waiting for God's Son, our rescuer. Many indeed shall incur the justice of Eonian extermination from the face of the Lord and from the glory of his strength. 2 Thessalonians 1:9. Many indeed. The day of Christ's unveiling from heaven will come in flaming fire, in which he and his powerful messengers will be dealing out vengeance to those not acquainted with God and those who are not obeying the evangel of our Lord Jesus Christ. 2 Thessalonians 1:7, B and 8. Yet it is in that very day, that we will be at ease, even as Paul, Silvanus, and Timothy are not totally uninvolved in the events of that fearful era. Compare 2 Thessalonians 1:1 and in verse 7. For we are awaiting God's Son out of heaven, whom he rouses from among the dead, Jesus, our rescuer out of the coming indignation. 1 Thessalonians 1:10. Yet this is only so because of the transcendent grace which God has, the transcendent grace of God which has come upon us. 2 Corinthians 9:14b. Oh, that's it. The end. And then here's the references. Charles Spurgeon's sermon, number 66. And then something from A. Enoch's Unsearchable Riches, volume 66, page 143. The keyword concordance under figures of speech, page 362. The destruction of Sodom and the surrounding cities is still apparent to all who visit the region. Hang on a second while I click the appropriate buttons to get ready for the next. Excuse for coffee. Okay, the destruction of Sodom and the surrounding cities is still apparent to all who visit this region. In this way, these cities are experiencing the justice of Eonian fire. The fire has long ceased, but its effects will remain and testify to God's judgment until the close of this eon, after which Sodom shall return to her former estate. See Ezekiel 16, verses 53 to 56. See the concordant commentary on page 376. Item number 5. The senses for the adversarial one or ones and the messengers of the same. The strict literal reading is to the throughcaster, adversary, and to the messengers of him. The reference is to those who fail to succor the people of Israel, Christ's brethren, according to the flesh, who rather oppose them. And The final item in reference item is number 6. Portions of this exposition have been adapted from Unsearchable Riches, volumes 24, page 116, page 116, page 52, pages 21 through 28, 57, and pages 106 and 107. So if it's volume 24, since they started about 1910, that would put volume 24 in the 1930s, like maybe 1934. Well, how'd you like that essay? From our friendly neighborhood CORAM boy. Yeah, that boy's going to grow up to do just fine, I say. Feel free to hit the StreamYard link, and come in.
My message this morning is entitled The Judgment of the Nations. It's centered upon Matthew 25, verses 31 through 46, with a special consideration given to verse 46 concerning those who shall be coming away into Eonian chastening, yet the just into life Eonian. The authorized version renders the key expressions, as you know, everlasting punishment and life eternal. It's quite difficult for the eternal hell-oriented dispensationalist who correctly recognizes the time frame and limited scope of this passage prior to the millennium and only concerned with a small portion of mankind to account for both such an early and parochial endless hell. And the problems are only multiplied for the traditional view. As you'll recall, it sees this passage as equivalent to the Great White Throne, the crack of doom and judgment day, in which all humanity is arraigned before the bar of God to hear their eternal destiny declared to them. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Our God and our Father, we thank you that we might be together today and that you've poured out your love in the hearts of each one. We thank you that we're completed in Christ, and our prayers go out to all your people everywhere and indeed to all mankind. We pray with thanksgiving in Christ's name. Amen. Tremendous judgment upon the nations of the earth, certain and sudden, has long been predicted by Israel's prophets. Quite a number of passages in the Greek scriptures are concerned with this theme as well. The time is coming as the day of the Lord begins to unfold when men will say, peace and security. Yet it is at that very time when extermination will be standing over them unawares. As Paul says, even as a pang over the pregnant, and they may by no means escape. 1 Thessalonians 5, verses 2 and 3. Consider Revelation 16:16 and 19:11 through 21. The earth's armies will be mobilized at Armageddon against God's Christ. This is at the city of Megiddo, about 60 miles north of Jerusalem. Here is what will happen. Let's read chapter 19, Revelation 19, and verses 11 through 21. Beginning in Revelation 19 and verse 11. And I perceived heaven open, and lo, a white horse. And
Hello.
Good morning, Ace. How are you?
Fine, baby. You just wake up?
Oh, no. I watched your whole reading.
Okay. Now we're hearing it from the horse's mouth.
All right.
Yeah, if you want to interrupt and say something, that's fine. Just say pause it. Because on this platform, it doesn't backtrack, 20 minutes or 30. I'm in better control on this platform.
Okay.
There you go. You ready?
Yep.
Rock on.
he who is sitting on it is called faithful and true. And in righteousness is he judging and battling. Now his eyes are a flame of fire, and on his head are many diadems, having names written of which no one except himself is aware. And he is clothed in a cloak dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies in heaven, dressed in cambric, white and clean, followed him on white horses. And out of his mouth a sharp blade is issuing, that with it he should be smiting the nations. And he will be shepherding them with an iron club. And he is treading the wine trough of the fury of the indignation of God, the Almighty. And on his cloak and on his thigh he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And I perceived another messenger standing in the sun, and he cries with a loud voice, saying to all the birds which are flying in mid-heaven, Hither, be gathered for the great dinner of God, that you may be eating the flesh of kings, and the flesh of captains, and the flesh of the strong, and the flesh of horses, and of those sitting on them, and the flesh of all freemen as well as slaves, and of small and of great. And I perceived the wild beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered to do battle with him who is sitting on the horse and with his army. and the wild beast is arrested, and with it the false prophet who does the signs in its sight, by which he deceives those getting the emblem of the wild beast, and those worshiping its image. Living, the two were cast into the lake of fire, burning with sulfur, and the rest were killed with the blade, which is coming out of the mouth of him who is sitting on the horse. And all the birds are satisfied with their flesh. What a tremendous judgment. This is what will happen. This event is spoken of much earlier by Jeremiah in chapter 25, verses 30 through 33. Yahweh is roaring from the height and is giving forth his voice from his holy habitation. Yahweh has a contention with the nations. He enters into judgment with all flesh. The wicked he gives to the sword. They shall not be bewailed, nor gathered, nor entombed. They shall become for manure on the surface of the ground. Similarly, Zechariah 14, verse 12. And this shall come to be the stroke with which Yahweh will strike all the peoples who mustered their hosts against Jerusalem. Putrefied is their flesh, yet they are standing on their feet, and their eyes shall putrefy in their holes, and their tongue shall putrefy in their mouths. Also, Isaiah 63, verses 2 through 4. For what reason is there red on thy clothing, and thy garments are as treaders in a wine trough? And Yahweh answers, the winepress I trod alone, and of the peoples there is no man with me, and I am treading them in my anger, and trampling them in my fury, and their gore is spattering on my garments, and all my clothing I sully, for the day of vengeance came for them, and the year of my redeemed has come. And also let's turn to Revelation chapter 6 and verses 16 and 17. Revelation chapter 6 and verse 16. This is quite understandably so. And they are saying to the mountains and to the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is sitting on the throne, and from the indignation of the Lambkin. For the great day of their indignation came, that of God and his Christ, of their indignation came, and who is able to stand? Humanity will be at the depth of its depravity by this time, for all dwelling on the earth will be worshiping Satan. Turn to Revelation chapter 13, verses 4 through 8. What the depths of depravity will be. Revelation 13 and verse 4. And they worship the dragon, seeing that it gives authority to the wild beast. And they worship the wild beast, saying, who is like the wild beast, and who is able to battle with it? And to it was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. And to it was given authority to do what it wills 42 months. And it opens its mouth in blasphemies toward God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, and those tabernacling in heaven. And it was given to do battle with the saints and to conquer them. And authority was given to it over every tribe and people and language and nation. And all who are dwelling on the earth will be worshiping it. Everyone whose name is not written in the scroll of life of the Lambkin, slain from the disruption of the world. What a serious judgment this is. Yet in the destruction which follows, when the armies of the earth prepared for battle against God, we see that they are obliterated before they can even move into position. Subsequently, the wild beast and the false prophet are cast into the lake of fire. Satan himself is chained and cast into the abyss, or submerged chaos, and imprisoned there 1,000 years. That's Revelation chapter 20 and verse 3. Thus, all opposition to the establishment of Messiah's kingdom is silenced. Then it is that the seventh messenger trumpets, chapter 11, let's turn there. Then it is that the seventh messenger trumpets, Revelation 11 and verse 15, and loud voices occurred in heaven, saying, the kingdom of this world became our Lord's and his Christ's, and he shall be reigning for the eons of the eons. Amen. References may be found even in the Psalms to the one who will someday judge all the nations. The prophet Zephaniah gave this warning in chapter 3, verse 8. Wherefore, tarry for me, averring is Yahweh, for the day of my rising to testify, seeing that my judgment is to gather the nations, to convene the kingdoms, to pour out my menace upon them, all the heat of my anger. For by the fire of my jealousy, the entire earth shall be devoured, swallowed up, encompassed, or taken into this tremendous judgment. Joel gives further details in chapter 3, and I'd like to read verses 1 and 2 and verses 9 through 16 in Joel chapter 3. Here are some further details of this great time, in the time of the end, the conclusion of this eon, and the beginning then of the next. For behold, in those days and in that season, when I shall turn back the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also convene all the nations and bring them down to the vale or valley of Jehoshaphat. That is Yah, or the stem of Yahweh, Yah judges Jehoshaphat. And I enter into judgment with them there concerning my people and my allotment, Israel, whom they disperse among the nations, and my land, which they apportion. And verse 9. Proclaim this among the nations, hallow a war, rouse the masters, all the mortals of war shall come close and ascend. Pound your mattocks into swords, and your pruning hooks into lances. The defeatist shall say, a master am I. Mobilize and come, all nations from round about, and they are convened. There, Yahweh, settle thy masters. All the nations shall rouse and ascend to the vale of Jehoshaphat. For there will I sit to judge all the nations from round about. Send forth the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, tread, for the wine trough is full. The wine vats run over, for great is their evil. Throngs in the vale of decision, or the valley where Yahweh decides or judges. For near is the day of Yahweh in the vale of decision. The sun and the moon are somber, and the stars gather in their brightness. And Yahweh shall roar from Zion, and from Jerusalem shall he give forth his voice. And the heavens and the earth shall quake, yet Yahweh is a refuge for his people, and a stronghold for the sons of Israel in that day. The Lord's words in Luke 21, 24 through 27 concern this period as well. Luke chapter 21, and beginning in verse 24. And they shall be falling by the edge of the sword, and shall be led into captivity into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden by the nations, until the eras of the nations may be fulfilled. And there shall be signs in the sun and the moon, and the constellations, and on the earth pressure of nations in perplexity, at the resounding of the sea and the shaking, at the chilling of men from fear and apprehensiveness of that which is coming on the inhabited earth. For the powers of the heavens shall be shaken, and they shall be seeing the Son of Mankind coming in a cloud with power and much glory. Also Matthew chapter 24 and verses 7 through 9. Think about what it takes to prepare for the millennial kingdom on earth. Matthew 24, 7 through 9. For roused shall be a nation against a nation, and a kingdom against a kingdom, and there shall be famines and quakes in places. Yet all these are the beginning of pangs. Then shall they be giving you up to affliction, and they shall be killing you, and you shall be hated by all of the nations because of my name. All right. Finally comes the judgment of the nations themselves. And that's what I especially want to center on this morning. It's going to be by the Son of Mankind before the throne of his glory. Matthew 25. Matthew 25. And beginning in verse 31. Now, whenever the Son of Mankind may be coming in his glory, and all the holy messengers with him, then shall he be seated on the throne of his glory, and in front of him shall be gathered all the nations, and he shall be severing them one from another, even as a shepherd is severing the sheep from the kids. And he shall be standing the sheep indeed at his right, yet the kids at the left. Now, I'd like to comment on verse 31 concerning the holy messengers. The names or even the nature of those who are his holy messengers here is not revealed. It is enough to know that they are holy messengers, ones of high station themselves, for they are the retinue of the Son of Mankind, the very sovereign of the universe. Colossians 1, verse 18. By this time, all opposition from the nations has been obliterated. Their leaders, along with their military forces, have been destroyed. A new political order needs to be established, a government under the headship of God's people, Israel. Under the new covenant, God will put his spirit in the people of Israel, giving them a new spirit, softening their heart, and cause them to walk in his law ideally. That's what's predicted of the new covenant. Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 34. And also, that's in Ezekiel 36, verses 25 through 28, the primary revelation concerning the new covenant. That is, it's what follows the old Mount Sinai covenant, and it's figuratively called a covenant. What it actually is that God puts his spirit in them and causes them to walk in his law when he brings them out from among the dead. And so rather than it being a thing that Israel will show what they can do of themselves or show what they can do if God helps, as most people fancy of themselves today, no, it will be what God can do in them when he causes them to do his will, that all the glory might be his and not theirs. Then this nation of priests, chosen because of God's love for their fathers, will hearken to the voice of Yahweh, their Elohim, to observe and to keep all his instructions, and he will give them supremacy over all the nations of the earth. Deuteronomy 28 and verse 1. Isn't that wonderful? After all that time of all of their waywardness and departure, I think of Exodus 19:6, where Israel is to be a nation of priests, and the thought of the word for priests is sacred ones that would be appointed by God in order to bless others, chosen because of God's love for their fathers. Wonderful passages on that are Deuteronomy 4:37, chapter 7, 7 and 8, and chapter 10, verse 15. It was because of his love for the patriarchs that these blessings are the people of Israel, certainly not any righteousness of their own. And they will hearken to the voice of Yahweh, their Elohim. They'll observe and keep all his instructions, and he will give them supremacy over all the nations of the earth. All the blessings promised by Moses will finally come to them. All these blessings will come on you and overtake you in case you should hearken to the voice of Yahweh, your Elohim. Deuteronomy 28, verse 2. And then it lists all these marvelous blessings. So Yahweh will make you to be the head and not the tail, and you will surely be above, and you shall not be below. Deuteronomy 28:13a. They couldn't do it under the old covenant. Finding fault with them, God is going to make a new covenant. He's going to do it in a way that will save them and deliver it and really bring it to pass. In order to commence the establishing of the kingdom, the Israelite world empire, the king, whose title here is the Son of Humanity, gathers all the nations before the throne of his glory. Perhaps the way this will occur is through representatives, even as we read that in the kingdom, all flesh shall come to worship before me in Jerusalem, says Yahweh, according to each Sabbath quota and each monthly quota, Isaiah 66 and verse 23. After all the nations are gathered before him, he will be severing them. The word severing in the Greek speaks of putting space between one and another. He will be severing them from one another, even as a shepherd is severing the sheep from the kids, Matthew 25:32. Now let's turn to Matthew 25:33 and read on from there. Matthew 25 and verse 33. And he shall be standing the sheep indeed at his right, yet the kids at the left. Then shall the king be declaring to those at his right, hither, blessed of my Father, enjoy the allotment of the kingdom, made ready for you from the disruption of the world. For I hunger, and you give me to eat. I thirst, and you give me drink. A stranger was I, and you took me in. Naked, and you clothed me. Infirm am I, and you visit me. In jail was I, and you come to me. Then the just will be answering him, saying, Lord, when did we perceive thee hungry, and nourish thee, or thirsting, and we give thee drink? Now, when did we perceive thee a stranger, and took thee in, or naked, and we clothed thee? Now, when did we perceive thee infirm, or in jail, and we came to thee? And answering, the king shall be declaring to them, Verily, I am saying to you, inasmuch as you do it to one of these, the least of my brethren, you do it to me. Then shall he be declaring to those also at his left, Go from me, you cursed, into the fire Eonian, made ready for the adversary and his messengers. For I hunger, and you do not give me to eat. I thirst, and you do not give me drink. A stranger was I, and you did not take me in naked, and you did not clothe me, infirm and in jail, and you did not visit me. Then shall they also be answering, saying, Lord, when did we perceive you hungering or thirsting, or a stranger, or naked, or infirm, or in jail, and we did not serve you? Then shall he be answering them, saying, Verily I am saying to you, inasmuch as you do it not to one of these, the least, neither do you it to me. And these shall be coming away into chastening Eonian, yet the just into life Eonian. Now let's think about this. It is evident, and fortunately so for the sheep nations at his right, that they will not be judged just for their acts in the time of the end, when they were under Babylon's influence. Otherwise, none would be saved. For during their great affliction, Israel will be hated by every nation. Matthew 24 and verse 9. Evidently, their mean or average disposition toward Israel during the entire eras of the nations will be taken into account. It was during this long interval that the Jews were scattered among all the nations and suffered the persecution by the left-hand nations. Likewise, it was during this same extensive period that the right-hand nations received their opportunities to provide the Jews with food and clothing, drink, and shelter. Here we have in the figure kids, the nations who declined to aid God's people Israel in their distress. In a context dealing with nations, the Son of Mankind's brethren, Matthew 25:40, of course, are the nation of Israel. It is they who are his brethren, his relatives according to the flesh. Compare Romans 9:3 and 4, as Paul says the same. Those nations who helped Israel, the sheep of this parable, are invited into the glorious Eonian kingdom. That will be life indeed. The rest are pruned off, and in the figurative language used, sent away into the fire Eonian. Under strict Eonian chastening, though mortal life will continue, it may be that at times life will not seem worth living. With these thoughts in view, we can better understand the expressions Eonian life for these nations and Eonian chastening for those nations. We often hear it said, God didn't prepare hell for man, he only prepared it for the devil and his angels. The idea is that this seems to be an attempt to commend his character to us, in that while he didn't prepare it for us, he did prepare it for others. And then it would remind me of if one had a neighbor who actually did prepare some horrible form of torture for his own child and had no intention of actually subjecting my child to it at a certain point, but later on decided that it would suit him well in addition. So it's pretty unsatisfactory. Friends, if you'll follow this parable carefully, I believe you'll find that fire Eonian here in Matthew 25 at the beginning of the 1,000 years is a figure of the kid nation's Eonian chastening in the coming eon, according to the writings of the prophets. On the other hand, the lake of fire in Revelation 20, which is the second death, is a literal fire, for it is the means or agency which brings the second death to the rest of mankind, following the day of judging after the 1,000 years. Nations cannot be chastened in literal fire. The chastening of nations in fire should alert us to an obvious figurative usage. Even if this were missed, it would remain evident that even individual persons could hardly be put into a literal fire, even for a few seconds, much less into a long Eonian fire, without soon destroying their bodies, and even sooner putting them in shock. Chastening would be impossible, for death would be nearly immediate. A good example of literal fire and death is concerning the fall of the great city of Babylon in Revelation. It is only during the fall of Babylon when the worshippers of the wild beast and its image will be subjected. Only at that time when they will be subjected to torment in fire and sulfur. And it only includes and concerns them, not others. In the hour when judgment comes upon that city, the smoke of the great conflagration will begin to rise, and the fumes associated with their torment, the fire produces smoke, of course, great fires. The fumes associated with their torment will ascend for the eons of the eons. However, fire soon destroys human bodies, even if, due to natural causes, it should continue to burn for thousands of years. The entire account is one of the desolation, Revelation 18, 17, and 19, of the most notable city of Babylonia in the conclusion of this eon, Revelation 14, 8 through 11. It will mean death to its inhabitants, Revelation 18, 8. Compare 18:9 through 24. Similarly, only the adversary, along with the wild beast and the false prophet, will receive torment for the eons in the lake of fire. And the nature of the torment is not revealed. Revelation 20, verse 10. We can recall the disciples being tormented on the Sea of Galilee when the storm arose. Doubtlessly, it will be suited to their superhuman capacities. It need not at all be excruciating bodily pain, but may well be a result of the frustration of their designs and the result of defeat, humiliation, and confinement. Now, having considered these great events in the book of Revelation, by contrast, let's return to the fire Eonian in Matthew 25. The fire present at the beginning of the 1,000 years, which is a figure of the kid nation's Eonian chastening in the coming eon, according to the writings of prophets. The fire is like that mentioned in the prophets, which overtakes those nations which oppose Israel. Here, the fiery judgment is extended to Eonian proportions in order to preserve Israel during the era of the kingdom. Within the terms of the parable, it seems certain that the ones in view for whom this fire is said to be made ready are the adversary or leading adversative nation and its messengers, those who had spoken against Israel, who will therefore suffer for it in the day of the Lord. The sense is the adversative one and the messengers of the same, to take interpretation out of the language. The reference is to the primary opposing nations among all those nations which fail to succor the people of Israel, Christ's brethren, according to the flesh. And you see that expression, especially in the King James Version. The devil and his angels has really set a mindset upon people that's quite gratuitous and not warranted by anything in the Greek text. Angelos, messenger, is sometimes used of mortal men. For example, John the Baptist, Matthew 11 and verse 10. The word speaks of one's office, not his nature. Though it is often used of celestial couriers, this is not its meaning. It simply refers to one who carries a message, be his nature what it will, and his message what it will. Adversary is not a proper noun. It by no means is always used in reference to the great spirit being Satan. For example, let's look at three passages where it certainly isn't. It's used of men. 1 Timothy chapter 3. Timothy chapter 3 and verse 11. The wives, similarly, are to be grave, that is, attendant to things of weight or significance, import. They're to be grave people, not adversaries, sober, faithful in all things. Similarly, 2 Timothy 3, verse 3, this is the way men will be in latter days. 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 3. Beginning in verse 2, men will be selfish, fond of money, ostentatious, proud, calumniators, stubborn to parents, ungrateful, malign, without natural affection, implacable, adversaries, uncontrollable, fierce, averse to the good, traitors, rash, and conceited. And the last reference, Titus chapter 2 and verse 3, where adversary is used of mortal men, even believers. Titus chapter 2 and verse 3. In verse 2 beginning, the aged men are to be sober, grave, sane, sound in the faith, in love, and endurance. The aged women, similarly, in demeanor, as becomes the sacred, not adversaries. So you see, there's quite a tendency, because there are warnings about this, for such ones to serve, however unintentionally, as practical adversaries. And so recall that adversary is not a proper noun. It by no means is always used in reference to the great spirit being Satan. And you'll recall that he is in the submerged chaos, or the abyss, bound there for 1,000 years. He can hardly be there and also go away into the Eonian chastening and the fire thereof that is for the nations that are the kids. You think about it. Now the word diabolo, you've heard the English word diabolical. That's where we get it. Diabolo, adversary, used here in Matthew 25:41, is an adjective. You might think it was a noun, just to look at it in the version. Diabolo is an adjective, dative, masculine, singular. Now the Greek word atu, which is the word his messengers, atu literally is of him or of it. To be impartial, it is of same. It's the relative pronoun, genitive, masculine, third person, singular. The fact that these two words are both masculine in Greek gender merely signifies grammatical agreement. It has no bearing on translation, much less on interpretation. This was certainly A. Knox's conviction as far as that's concerned. He's the primary one who taught me the things that I'm sharing with you this morning. But as it stands now, our own version reads his messengers, but it is the messengers of the same, of this adversary that is in view here. This setting calls to mind the language of the Hebrew prophets, this whole matter here. Israel in Egypt is figured as a burning thorn bush. Exodus chapter 3 and verse 2. Compare verse 7 in the terrible ordeal that the Egyptians put them through. They were in an iron furnace or crucible, we read in Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 20, or 1 Kings 8:51, Jeremiah 11 verse 4. Isaiah in chapter 48:10 explains it as a crucible of humiliation. When used figuratively, the lexical definition of the English word crucible is a severe trial. Jerusalem has been melted in the crucible of affliction. Yahweh blew upon her in the fire of his indignation. Ezekiel 22:18 through 22. Confer Malachi 3:2 and Obadiah 18. The judgments of the nations during the day of Yahweh in the coming Eon are spoken of in the prophets under the figure of fire. That's very significant, because that's what we're dealing with here, is the Eonian chastening of the coming Eon. God will send a fire on Magog and the isles, Ezekiel 38:22 and 39:6. He will set a fire in Egypt in the day of Yahweh, Ezekiel 30 verse 8 and 16. And let's even look at Zechariah 14, 17, and 18, setting a fire in Egypt in the day of Yahweh. Well, I think we can get some indication of the nature of this fire in Zechariah 14 and reading in verse 17. And it comes, whoever will not go up from the families of the earth to Jerusalem to worship the King, Yahweh of hosts, then the downpour shall not come on them. And if a family of Egypt shall not go up and shall not come, then it is not on them. to it shall come the stroke with which Yahweh will strike all the nations, which will not to go up to celebrate the celebration of booths there in the 7th month in the fall. This shall be the sin of Egypt and the sin of all the nations, which will not go up to celebrate the celebration of booths. They'll have fiery judgment come upon them as a consequence of their disobedience to what they're told to do. God will blow against the Ammonites with the fire of his indignation. Ezekiel 21 and verse 31. If all the nations hostile to Israel were actually consumed by a raging conflagration, what need would there be for the iron club with which he will be shepherding the nations in that day? Revelation 19 and verse 15. They will be afflicted and forced to obey under their fiery judgment. They'll be afflicted and forced to obey as Israel in Egypt. This will be their corrective chastening. Matthew 25:46. Fire is often used figuratively and of temporary judgments. Even the saints, we ourselves, will be saved thus, as through fire. 1 Corinthians 3:15. I think of 2 Thessalonians 1, 4, and 5 of the afflictions that we experience, and the Thessalonians there had themselves, and how these are in the just judging of God, these fiery trials that we go through. Apart from all the administrational distinctions and failure to notice those things, the popular notion that this passage speaks of ourselves and the gospel of our salvation is a clear index of the depth of the prevailing darkness concerning God's grace. For we enter into Eonian life at a far higher level and in a much more glorious way than these sheep nations, solely as the objects of God's grace. Yet they do so as a reward for their works. Indeed, even for these nations, this allotment was made ready for them from the disruption of the world. Matthew 25:34. Since it was essential nonetheless for them to qualify for this allotment, it is evident that they only acted as Israel's benefactors because Yahweh Elohim directed their steps to do so. Proverbs 16 and verse 9. There is no free will here. There was no risk involved, no human independence. God alone will be glorified in that day. Though it is an impossible equation, some have confounded this judgment, many have, with that of the great white throne. Let us note some of the differences, however. This severing of the nations in Matthew 25 occurs at the unveiling of Jesus Christ, whenever the Son of Mankind may be seated upon the throne of his glory, at the beginning of the millennium, if you would compare Matthew 24, 29, and 30 with 25, 31. The great white throne is after the millennium, Revelation 20, verse 7 and 11. It is on the earth, that is the judgment in Matthew 25. It is on the earth in the valley of Jehoshaphat, as we read in Joel 3, verse 2. Not at a time when heaven and earth flee, and no place found for those who stand before the great white throne, Revelation 20, verse 11 and 12. It concerns only the living nations of that day. Yet those who stand before the throne are the entire rest of the dead following the millennium. Confer Revelation 20, verse 5, the A part. It concerns living delegations from the nations, not dead individuals roused for judgment. Its basis is national treatment of the Jews, not all the individual deeds of one's lifetime. Its consequence is the dividing of the nations into those blessed and cursed with respect to the millennium, not the condemnation of all present as to enter into the second death at a much later time. Perhaps the most common objection we receive concerning the eons is the claim that if everlasting punishment should ever come to an end, then life eternal would do the same. Matthew 25:46 in the Authorized Version. The objector is so selfishly preoccupied with preserving what he supposes to be blessings for himself in this passage that he is prepared to assist in stoking the fires of hell forever if this should be necessary in order to protect his own interests. Instead of the usual, quote, translation, unquote, these words should be rendered chastening Eonian and life Eonian. By its ending, SIS, colossus, chastening, refers not to a state, but to an action continuing on, chastening. And it has in view an action performed not as a penal infliction, but with a view toward amendment or rectification. Now, since God is love and wills to save all, and will accomplish all his desire, his ultimate purpose in even his most severe judgments could never be the eternal punishment of anybody. He cannot deny himself. Indeed, it is well known and confirmed by many scholars that even the secular usage of colossus, the word chastening, had in view not some kind of terrible vindictive punishment, but acts done for the sake of betterment or correction. For example, the works of Liddell or Max Muller or Trench. And there's a work entitled The Greek Word Ionios, shown to denote limited duration, that Dean Huff hopes to bring out later this year through Savior of All Fellowship. And it gives excellent references on this matter to show the force of this word in common Greek on pages 52 and 53. It was published by the Northwestern Universalist Publishing House in the late 19th century. In the scriptures, in Acts 4, verse 21, the Jews released John and Peter, finding nothing how they should be chastening them. Did they not aim to reform them? Was not their chastening with a view toward their returning to the unbelieving Jewish fold? From their standpoint, the word was certainly used to convey the idea of reformation. To show that it had this meaning, in Greek usage, we cite Plato. This is from Protag, section 38, volume 1. Page 252. Quite an interesting citation here. For if, O Socrates, you will consider what is the design of punishing or chastening, kaladzine, the wicked, this of itself will show you that men think virtue is something that may be acquired. For no one punishes, chastens, kaladzai, the wicked, looking to the past only, simply for the wrong he has done. That is, no one does this thing who does not act like a wild beast, desiring only revenge without thought. Hence, he who seeks to punish kaladzine with reason does not punish for the sake of the past wrong deed, but for the sake of the future, that neither the man himself who is punished may do wrong again, nor any other who has seen him chastised. And he who entertains this thought must believe that virtue may be taught, and he punishes, kaladzai, for the purpose of deterring from wickedness. Even the secular usage of the word was thus. For as a light are your judgments to the earth, the dwellers of the habitants learn righteousness. Isaiah 26, 9b. Also, the works in the 19th century, Eternal Hope, pages 199 to 201, and Mercy and Judgment, pages 407 to 409, by F.W. Farrar, published by the E.P. Dutton and Company, give fine references on this matter of the actual secular usage of colossus. So the word had that sense, and it's very well known. It's only because of the popular error concerning Ionios and claiming that, well, it must not mean a corrective chastening like they used it themselves if it's got to go on forever. You see, that's why it was turned around in theology, actually contrary to everyday usage of the people themselves. It is vital for us to recognize that the words kolosson Ionian, chastening Eonian, in Matthew 25:46 are in reference to national judgments, which the Son of Mankind will make in that day, whenever he may be coming in his glory. They are connected with the kingdom of the heavens and are to be implemented in the coming eon. This judgment of God is prompted by the unworthy way in which many of the living nations will treat the people of Israel in the time of her great affliction, in the conclusion of this present eon. This passage is not concerned with any of God's dealings with the members of the ecclesia, which is Christ's body, the ecclesia, which is his body, Ephesians 1:22. Instead, it has in view the granting of rewards or chastenings in response to the works of the nations of that day. It is not a revelation concerning divine grace, nor certainly of the evangel of our salvation and its transcendent grace. Though Eonian life, and certainly Eonian chastening, will come to an end, death will one day be abolished. And all will then be made alive in an era in which it already will have been true for an entire eon, that death will be no more. Revelation 21:4 and 1 Corinthians 15:20 through 28. The promises concerning our future life do involve the thought of endlessness, but this idea is not conveyed through any usage or form of the word ion. So it's very much mistaken to use any passages where it is used to refer to the endlessness of our future life. Therefore, we should never speak of the matter of the endlessness of our future life by employing any of the usages of this word. Instead, to think of the endlessness of our future life, we should say that we will always be together with the Lord. 1 Thessalonians 4, 17 and 18. We will be immortal and incorruptible. 1 Corinthians 15, 53. Conform to the image of God's Son. Romans 8, 29. Our mortal bodies having been vivified. Romans 8, 11. And in his presence, the second class of vivification. 1 Corinthians 15, 23. We will have already been alive for 1,000 years, the coming eon, when the word goes forth that there will be no more death. Isn't that wonderful? We will continue to live during that eon as well, the length of which is not revealed, until the consummation when all will finally be vivified. Death will then be abolished for all mankind, that God may be all in all. Portions of the previous study have been adapted from Unsearchable Riches, volumes 24, page 116, 57, pages 106, 107, by A. Enoch, 52, pages 21 through 28, by M. Yeagle. I'd like to share with you a reply I made to a friend who asked us to comment on Paul's reference to the temple of God in 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 4. Many believe that the people of Israel will never again be established in their divine service according to Moses' law, whether in the conclusion of this eon or in the coming eon. The many clear prophecies concerning Israel's kingdom on earth are not accepted literally, but only as symbolic references to the church. This position is called amillennialism. The papacy of the Roman Catholic Church is believed to be the man of sin, or rather of lawlessness. It is felt that a literal temple edifice will never again be constructed in Palestine, and that a building in which such a wicked man would be seated could never be called the temple of God. Here is my reply. The word Antichrist, Antichristos, instead anointed, refers to one who is, in one sense or another, a false anointed one, someone who seeks to displace Christ, who acts instead of him, taking his office upon himself. There have been and will yet be many such ones. Confer 1 John 2, 18 and 22, chapter 4, verse 3, 2 John 7, and compare Matthew 24, verse 5. The man of lawlessness spoken of in 2 Thessalonians 2, of course, is the ultimate Antichrist. Hieron, sanctuary, as stated in the keyword concordance, refers to the entire sacred realm, comprising all the open courts, halls, and buildings, which were open to the Jewish public, while the holy place and holy of holies alone were called the naos, or temple, into which only the priests and Levites could enter. Sanctuary appears always to be used literally. In most cases, this is true of temple as well. However, because of our spatial access to God through Christ, Ephesians 3:12, and our intimate relationship with him, in a few places, Paul metaphorically says that the believers are the temple, the naos of God. It is important not to carry over even literal connotations, spatial contextual usages, from one passage to another. And it is especially important not to bring over the connotations present in an obvious figurative usage, for example, 2 Corinthians 6:16, into other passages. Such a figurative usage may or may not be present in additional passages. The presence of several texts of undoubted similar figurative usage prove nothing, actually, concerning any remaining passages in which the word may be found. We must not inductively assume or infer, yet this is a constant battle for us all, Over the centuries, the papacy of Rome, in a foremost way, has indeed been Antichrist in nature, but this does not make it the fulfillment of the prophecy concerning the man of lawlessness in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Dean Huff and I have prepared some messages centered around the theme of the presence of Christ in 1 Thessalonians 4, 13 through 17, but touching on many other matters. These are available on cassette number 322 and 323. Readings of Vladimir Jelosnov's long out of print excellent study in Daniel concerning the time of the end are available on tape as well. The ecclesia, which is Christ's body, refers to a special called out company among God's people who possess the blessings of Paul's distinctive evangel, as contrasted with the evangel of the circumcision. Yet Israel's glorious kingdom, according to the writings of the prophets, will indeed be established on the earth in its appointed time. Even apart from these considerations, it would seem improbable and unlike Paul for temple to refer to the ecclesia in 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 4, for the following reason as well. This would involve an antecedent employment of a metaphorical idea from his later writings in a non-metaphorical present construction. I would surely think that the Thessalonians would have taken his words as a reference to the actual temple in Jerusalem. I know of no reason why they could not or should not be a literal reference to the temple edifice itself. Since this chapter is concerned with matters in the day of the Lord, and in light of the major prophecies elsewhere concerning that era and its events, it seems certain that the reference here is to the literal temple. A.E. Knox's two works, Studies in Daniel and The Unveiling of Jesus Christ, go into matters of eschatology in great detail. I commend these works to you. Under the new covenant, Israel will reach a turning back to the Lord, and the present covering lying upon their heart will be taken away. Confer 2 Corinthians 3, 12 through 16, and the new covenant prophecy in Jeremiah 31, verses 31 through 34. Though their rejection of their Messiah was according to God's intention, had they not rejected him, which led to the destruction of the temple by the Roman armies, they should have and would have continued on in their divine service, according to Moses' law. And yet they gave him up in the specific counsel and foreknowledge of God, according to what he designated beforehand to occur. Acts 2:23, chapter 3:18, and chapter 4:27 and 28. Had they recognized and accepted their king, then the kingdom would have been established in the first century, and the righteousness of the law would have continued on into the kingdom itself. In the coming eon, when the new, as it were, covenant, for it's not literally a covenant, when the new covenant is established, Israel will be caused to walk in the law of Yahweh, fulfilling it most precisely, heeding all its many precepts. John the Baptist was only metaphorically Elijah. This one is that one, the Elijah of the Malachi 4 prophecy. That grand prophecy will yet find its complete fulfillment in the conclusion of the eon. This will involve righteous worship in Jerusalem under a righteous priesthood, following the instructions of the law for Israel's divine service. These include the sanctuary and temple. Therefore, the presence of such a temple in the concluding era of this eon will be altogether worthy of being called the temple of God. It will by no means be built under the supervision of the man of lawlessness. It is only that he will defile it at a later time. It will be constructed by inspired Israelites under the direction of Yahweh. The secret of Babylon the Great, confer Revelation 17, 5 and 7, is involved in this entire matter. These topics are considered in our works by Brothers Knock and Jelosnov. While I am quite interested in these themes and have given them a good deal of attention, my main efforts have primarily been given to the Pauline Evangel, our election in Christ, the final salvation of all, the place and purpose of evil, the nature of grace, human volition, divine judgment, and so forth. May he overwhelm us by the evangel of his grace and by a realization that all glory is to be ascribed to God, not to ourselves.
Well, sir, thanks for hanging out this morning. Hope you enjoyed your coffee. And these thoughts by Jim CORAM. Check back later. Maybe we'll be inspired to carry on the conversation. Grace to you. Peace from God our Father. Bye for now.
Bye, Ace.